an indoor build, a basic build, if you're in a heated environment for that, I would totally recommend the Santan solar panels, a grow watt inverter charger. So those are your two major points. That's your start point and your end point. And then we can fill in the details in the middle. Hey, I'd like to give you an insight into my solar build and all of the decisions or reasons behind why I went with the parts that I did. For my build, I'm just starting out as a beginner. I have a pretty decent background in electronics, computers, IT, electrical components, some wiring, both AC and DC. Through this process, it has reminded me of a lot of the ins and outs that I learned a long time ago, but is really necessary to complete a successful build on your own. I definitely recommend that you seek a qualified expert for whatever type of system you're looking to build and get qualified quotes for that. And then also be patient with your representatives. These builds for solar are almost entirely 100% custom builds built to order, no matter if you're commercial or consumer. There are a few exceptions with the consumer ones where they try and bundle their own like solar panels with their solar generators, but we'll get into that in just a little bit. For me, starting this journey, I wanted to have a little bit more security in providing my own power and being able to sustain a long-term disaster. About a year ago, we had some very violent storms come through the area, and we were without power for basically a week. And it's the whole community was down. There were people driving for 50 to 100 miles to find gas to run their generators because the gas station had also lost its electricity, so the pumps wouldn't run. So nobody could get gas unless they went out of town for it. We've since then analyzed through our lifestyle and tried to look at areas that we can improve and become less reliant on those critical systems that are provided by a third party. That's really where it started for me. And then that kind of morphed into, hey, I think we'd like to go visit some family that's far away, but not have to pay for a hotel. So we were kind of looking at campers and different things like that. And we ended up getting an enclosed utility trailer. So pretty much a blank slate. And then from there, just trying to figure out what was most portable and affordable for meeting those needs. Beginning off with that, I started to find that there are a couple communities that have already taken big steps forward, and one of those is the van life community, and another one is off-grid living community. And a lot of times they have pretty similar qualities to the groups. Sometimes they cross over. Sometimes people just want to hop in an RV that they built themselves or a van and go for a road trip as a family. So all of that really appealed to me. For a while, it was difficult to find really much information on the web about personal solar builds, DIY kits that were affordable. I've got some neighbors that have more commercial builds. You're talking $20, $30, $40, $50,000 installs, maybe more, and really no guarantee on getting a federal rebate on any of that. So I started looking at used components or individual pieces to put together to build a small system. About the only thing in my area, in my region, for consumers at the time was Harbor Freight had some monocrystalline solar panels. 4 panels were 25 watts each and together made a 100-watt kit for about $200. Sometimes you would find it on sale for $150, maybe a little less, but it was right around $2 a watt mark, which is really expensive when you're trying to build solar, and that did not include the batteries. And these kits used what I now know as PWM charge controllers. They were only suitable for lead acid batteries and 12 volts. So it was a 12 volt system, and that got us by. That got us through. We were able to recharge vehicle batteries for vehicles that had sat around and stuff like that. Use it kind of as a maintenance system, and then an emergency backup to keep our phones charged and keep communications up. So that morphed into this larger project. And then I found the van life community were starting to show off a lot of these lithium iron phosphate battery builds. Most of the ones that had a decent amount of money put into their vans were using Battle-Born batteries and Victron charge controllers and inverters. And that's kind of what I ended up calling the Cadillac of DIY van life solar builds. It looks like most people that go that route go all in with Battle-Born batteries, all in with Victron equipment, and that's fine. That's great. But it was pretty far out of reach for me when it came to budget. So I started looking at alternative battery options and then alternative charge controllers, alternative inverters, and then trying to find affordable solar panels. From there, I started attacking it from the solar panel view because it seemed like a lot of my frustration was the expense per panel or per watt per panel that I was getting regionally from these Harbor Freight Thunderbolt kits. It seemed like the technology was a bit outdated and the output just was not there. Some van life community showed that there's a handful of providers from Bouge RV, Rich Solar, Jackery, Max Oak Blue Eddy. All these different companies provide smaller panels for camping and van life and small battery backups. That was nice, but then I found a van lifer community or a YouTuber who was visiting a shop that deals specifically with solar and van life builds in Portland, Oregon, called Light Harvest Solar. Their panels that we were looking at were 300 watts at roughly $300 a piece. That was a good enough deal to entice me to consider driving across the country with a utility trailer and haul a pair of panels back. But it would be a very expensive trip with the fuel prices as they've gone up. So then I started asking around, seeing if any one of my friends were interested in solar and if they wanted to go along. As we were looking into the options, it turns out there's a couple people who had found a company that sells used solar panels that are either off lease or just retired from commercial projects and resell them at serious discounts called Santan Solar. These panels you could get less than $60 or less than $70 shipped per panel, and they were like 250 watts. So then we made a bulk order of 2 pallets of 25 panels each on this group order and got our costs down significantly from this company. Got it shipped, distributed the panels out to each of the group buy-in members, started looking into what equipment it would take to get these panels into production. So we knew they had worked. We knew that they had been used. There has to be equipment available to put them to use. On the back of the panels, they have manufacturer stickers with all of their different ratings from watts, amps, volts, all of their expected ranges and outputs, any fuses that are necessary, things like that. And it turns out these panels run a lot higher voltage as a single panel. The Thunderbolt Harbor Freight panels run about 13.9 volts DC. So it's within tolerance range of just direct charging a 12-volt battery. These commercial panels from Santan Solar run about 33.5 to 35 volts per panel and can handle being put in series up to, I believe, 600 volts. So the challenge has been finding charge controller equipment and battery systems big enough to handle that much power coming in, inverter equipment and DC to DC buck converters that can convert that higher energy into something useful for the common household. One of the devices that I ended up putting my money into after watching a bunch of Hobotech videos was the Max Oak Blue Eddy AC200P. It's a 2000 amp hour, 2000 watt hour, all-in-one solar generator. It can take up to 150 volts DC solar input at a little over 700 watts on the PV side. And then the inverter is a 2000 watt inverter, pure sine wave. So it's a 2000 watt pure sine wave inverter. Some of my friends have been like, oh, just tell me what batteries and charge controllers to get. And then I have resources to get a cheap inverter. With this equipment, you run into getting what you pay for or get lucky off the shelf in most of our big box stores, home stores, like Menards or Home Depot. Those places, even the automotive stores, sell modified sine wave inverters. So they're super cheap inverters, plug into your car battery or into your car outlet and produce a rough sketch of a sine wave, a rather boxy sketch of a sine wave off of that DC power to get your AC electronics powered up. This is really inefficient and really hard on those components, whatever you run off of that typically. And I've run tests side by side where I'll have a box fan, something simple like a box fan motor. So a 20-inch box fan running off of one of these inverters, and it's just noisy and chattery and sounds like it's not running right. And then I'll plug it into a pure sine wave inverter and it'll just hum nice and smooth, sometimes even smoother than on the grid, straight out of the electrical socket in the house. So this AC200P unit, it was nice and portable. I could lift it. It was less than 80 pounds, fit it almost anywhere, and it could accept the higher voltages from these Santan panels. I've since had time to do some testing. I can plug in about 4 panels in series, and that'll max out the voltage input. And then after that, I can do 4 more panels in parallel. So another chain of 4 series panels, and then parallel those with the first set of 4 in series, and then run that in. And that's about maximum efficiency with that unit. As far as power draw, it's great for like an Instapot or a pair of shop lights or a box fan. Stuff that's not super critical. Otherwise, and that stuff can run all day long, up to like 20 hours. It really depends on the math on the wattage of the device that it's drawing and how full of charge that battery is. So one of the limitations on this Bluetti device is I'm pretty much stuck with the size of battery that's in it. I can get larger batteries or more batteries and plug into it, but I can't just use its charge controller to charge those other batteries. I have to send it either through the DC out or the AC out and charge those batteries separately. So it's more parts to do that. And then to use those batteries, I would then have to turn around and plug them into either the solar input or figure out to get them into the AC charge port on this unit. I think they've made it a little more flexible on the newer units with the different model numbers, but this is what I'm rolling with, so it's what I got. So the train of thought there was if I needed more power or longer rainy day battery bank, then Jag35, Jehu Garcia, specializes in these DIY used batteries. So recycling scooter batteries, e-bike waste, sometimes it comes from cars or medical industrial waste, batteries that were purposed for something and then they decided not to manufacture that device, and now they have a ton of batteries, stuff like that. That's one of the providers that I'm looking into. Another provider for batteries is these EG4 batteries. They're a 19-inch rack mount battery, and those are super promising for all of these different builds. For my current build, I'm running a Bluetti AC200P with 4 to 8 Santan 250 watt panels running at like 35 volts each, and then 4 of those in series, another 4 in series, and then paralleling those 2 lines into a single input. And then it turns out that roughly 10 foot of channel strut will fit 3 panels. So on my trailer, I was able to bolt down or screw in 2 of these channel struts and then put 3 of these panels on the roof. So then I can put my solar generator inside the trailer, and then wherever the trailer's at, just make sure it's parked in a sunny spot, and then it'll be self-sufficient. We've done some tests, and an Instapot on this Bluetti, most recipes take probably 12 to 15% battery. We also have a small, it's like a medium-sized, larger than like a dorm room, but smaller than an apartment fridge that takes about 250 watts when it's running the compressor, and that'll run about 2, sometimes 3 days if you're lucky, if it's already cold. 2 to 3 days, it'll run a refrigerator 24/7 off of that one battery, and then we try and keep it charged between then. With solar panels plugged in on nice bright days, we could probably run that refrigerator indefinitely, so long as the components didn't freeze. One of the other big gotchas with solar is charging the batteries. With lithium iron phosphate, it's my preferred chemistry right now for consumer batteries. Way better than lead acid. Way better. There's lots of studies on that. With lead, it has serious voltage drops even without temperature drops, and you can only discharge them safely down to 50% charge, not 80 to 100%. With the lithium iron phosphates, you get steady charge almost the entire time, all the way down to 100% discharge. If you want to extend the longevity of your batteries, discharge them to 20% and then charge them up to 80% and keep them within the 20 and 20-80, 80-20 band, and it'll go 10, 11, 12 years by estimate. The rest of your equipment will be tired by the time you're replacing those batteries. You can abuse these batteries a little bit more, run them up to 100 all the time, and then drain them down to 10%, sometimes even lower. Pretty much no problem. By the time it becomes a problem, you'll probably already have saved up enough for the next technology. So at least 5 years. Most of these batteries have 10-year lifespans. Some of the companies are even coming out with a really bold 5-year warranty, replacement warranty on these newer batteries. From there, the question is, okay, what do we do for more of a household environment rather than just a single refrigerator or a single box fan or lights? So that has led me to looking for an inverter charger and discrete battery system. This is where it starts getting really difficult to make recommendations. As soon as you step away from the complete systems, the complete solar generator systems like the Jackeries, the Blue Eddies, the EcoFlows, it becomes really difficult to provide a good guess for anybody. You have to know exactly the math on the demand they're expecting, how long they're expecting to run that equipment, if it's 24/7 or not, if it's just strictly for emergencies and how long of an emergency, what voltages are expected on both the AC and DC side. If they're going to provide their own inverter, great, okay. Be aware that you need to make sure it's a pure sine wave inverter if you want the best, if you don't want to risk harming any of your consumer devices. The expected DC voltage for those inverters, it's an absolute must to have that information. Without that, you might have a 24 volt or 48 volt inverter and 12 volt batteries, or you might have 12 volt batteries or a 12 volt inverter and 24 or 48 volt batteries, either way. And you can run into really serious problems with fire hazards, stuff blowing up, equipment failing, blowing fuses, things like that if you don't get these numbers right. Say you have a 48 volt inverter charger, and then you're going to cut some cost corners by going with super budget batteries. So these would be like Chin's batteries or Wise batteries off of Amazon. Some of these super budget batteries, 100 amp hour, 12 volt lithium iron phosphate for less than $360 a piece. Some of these do not come with low temperature safety cutoffs on their battery management boards. Some of these batteries do not support being put in series to a 24 volt or 36 volt or 48 volt setup. They will fry or fail. So you really have to dig into what each piece is capable of and what it requires if you're going to go that route. If I had to recommend something, I would recommend starting with an inverter charger rather than going all the way to, hey, I'm going to get a cheap inverter and then tell me what I need. I'm sorry, that's incredibly difficult. I don't want to have to say no, but I'm real close to that. And here's why. You're asking me to make an analogy. Imagine calling up a mechanic shop and saying you need a tire for your vehicle. Mechanic says, sure, we sell tires. We can order special order. What do you need? Well, I'm going to pick up my vehicle, some parts of my vehicle. Okay, well, what tires do you need? They say, well, I want affordable. Okay, they leave it at that. And a couple weeks go by, and the mechanic doesn't get the size of the rim, the terrain that it's expected to perform in, or make and model of a vehicle. Maybe there's a manual to look up what the size is. This is commonly what most mechanics do, is they ask you what's your make and model and what year. And what that does is it lets them go into a service manual and be like, oh, that's 2010 Chevy or whatever. And then they can go through that service manual and see what the default wheel size or rim size is, typical tire size is expected for that vehicle, order it up, and then call the customer back, say, hey, we have these tires in, bring your vehicle in, we'll put them on. Now, in the scenario that I presented, we don't know if it's a military vehicle, if it's an all-terrain vehicle, if it's a special transport like a charter bus, or if it's a sports car. We don't know if it's a motorbike. There's no way we can help this person with their request. Buying an inverter and requesting your solar tech to provide you with what charge controller to get, and the only information you've provided at this point is the solar panels that you're using, it's near impossible. It's a huge project. It's near impossible to project how all those components would come together correctly within a reasonable budget and not have stuff blow up. So what you need in that situation is to know, okay, here's the batteries that I'm expecting to get, and here's the inverter that I have. Remember, the inverter, if that's the lynch piece here that you're just dead set on not getting a different one, you're getting a good deal on this for whatever reason, then even providing the make and model on that inverter would do wonders, because then your tech consultant can look up the model number, get the service manual for that, determine the voltage, the DC voltage, and potentially the amperage on that unit, and then go from there and work backwards. If it's capable of running 12 volt, then whatever batteries you want. If it's 48 volt, we need to be a little more particular. Maybe there's a 48 volt specific battery that's cheaper than buying a bunch of 12s that are capable of being run in series at 48 volts. 4 12-volt batteries might be more expensive than one 48-volt battery if those 12-volt batteries can even safely be put into a 48-volt configuration in the first place. So hopefully that makes sense in putting those pieces together. When you're talking with your consultants, if you're adamant on specific parts and pieces, work together to make sure that you have a full picture on what the specific model number is on those components that you're providing. Don't just expect them to look it up. There's way too many bits and pieces that could go wrong. From there, what I recommend is, if you can, run a higher voltage system because they run more efficiently. The lower voltage systems for the watt for watt, the same output. When you lower your voltage, you have to raise your amperage. And the easy way to put this in your mind in sort of a non-technical way is, when I increase amps, I increase heat. If I increase heat, components will start to fry and fail. If I increase volts, I can run potentially thinner wire and more efficient charge and discharge. So if you can, go with a 48 volt system. If you're starting with Santan solar PV panels, a whole stack of them, so somewhere between 1 and 14, we'll go with 12. That's easy math. Sets of 4, sets of 3 is your most likely scenario on those panels for series. And then probably up to 3, maybe 4 at the max parallel runs before you're talking about going into a different charge controller. Or you're looking at a larger system than what I've been researching, and you need to talk to your experts anyways. This video is in no way, shape, or form supposed to be a how-to. This is simply my journey on where I've come from and where I've come to on deciding different builds for the various small emergency scenarios that myself and some of my friends have come up with. So, skipping ahead a little bit, for suggesting an inverter charger combo to be able to handle more input and more output than what the Blue Eddy can do. Say you've got this stack of Santan solar panels. I would recommend, if possible, getting a hold of a Growatt brand inverter charger. These seem to have the most flexibility for the price. For less than $1,000, you can get a unit that can run, even without batteries potentially during the daytime, it can potentially run its inverter straight off of the solar input. That's pretty cool. A lot of these units also have built-in grid tie should you decide to go that route. The gotcha with these solar panels, these used ones from Santan, is the original manufacturer labels have been removed, aside from the output ratings, and those stickers are required for inspection by your utility company for safety purposes. When you're installing a grid tie system, your utility company's safety is in the mind of your utility company before you even consider selling them any electricity. So they need to verify that you have the proper shutoffs and that they're not going to get zapped if the power goes out and you're backfeeding for some reason into the power grid and fry one of their techs that's climbing up a pole to try and fix your neighborhood. So there's all sorts of complications with that. So what I've been looking at is so-called off-grid equipment, where we just don't tie it into the meter on the house. We're not tying it into the house electric. Also, with that, I'm not looking to install on someone's roof, especially in town. If you're going to install it on a roof, you're on your own with that. Check your local permits, local ordinances, codes, stuff like that. So for my builds that I've considered, we did this group buy on Santan panels. We all have pretty decent stack of panels. Most of us have about 12 each, is kind of roughly how it ended up. That means it comes out to somewhere between 1,800 and 3,000 watts. Yeah. Yep. So 250 watt panels, 12 of them is 3,000 watts total coming in. So that would be a 3 kilowatt system. You can get Grow Watt 3 kilowatt inverter chargers. Awesome. Okay. Most of the time, to get the best bang for your buck on these, you're going to get a 48 volt inverter charger. So you've got a Grow Watt inverter charger for $750 to $850, maybe $900. Between $700 and $900 for the base model that we're looking at. The Santan panels, they were roughly $720 total for 12. You've got to decide on your cabling and batteries from there. If you're going with the Grow Watt system, I would recommend an indoor build anyways. One of the gotchas with these lithium iron phosphate batteries is it's dangerous and could cause damage to the batteries or other things if they were to charge below 32 degrees Fahrenheit. They make battery warmers, or they make batteries with built-in battery warmers, or they make batteries with low temp sensors that just stop charging the battery at low temp. These batteries have battery management systems, or BMS, and that allows them to discharge below freezing but not to charge. If you are building your electrical distribution area indoors in a heated area, then you can get the bottom dollar chins batteries if you're running a 12 volt system. A lot of these bottom of the barrel batteries don't support being in series to 48 volts. So double check your inverter charger to see if it supports more than just 48 volts. If it does multi-chemistry like lead acid and multiple voltages, 12, 24, and 48 are the most common, then great. You're good to go there. An indoor build, a basic build, if you're in a heated environment for that, I would totally recommend the Santan solar panels, a Grow Watt inverter charger. So those are your two major points. That's your start point and your end point. And then we can fill in the details in the middle. The panels into some wire, PV wire, so rated for being outside in the sunlight, in the UV rays, in the hot, in the cold. Usually about 10 gauge is what I've been running. And then running that inside to your inverter charger or your charge controller, depending on which type of build you're doing. So we're going with the Grow Watt system for now. Running that into your Grow Watt, and then your Grow Watt into your Chins or Wise batteries, if you can get a hold of them, or into your EG4 batteries, the rack units. Now, one of the considerations on choosing batteries is your inverter has big capacitors in them that will cause sparks if they're not charged up and ready to go. Trying to fill those up right as soon as you plug in those batteries. So a lot of people use pre-charge resistors, where they'll put one end of the resistor onto the inverter, one end on their battery lead, and let those capacitors slowly charge without arcing. Set that resistor aside, then plug in their battery cable into the inverter. With the EG4 batteries, they're 48 volts. They have a built-in DC circuit breaker, which you would already have to pay for if you were doing a discrete build, so you don't need to buy that separate. They have a pre-charge resistor built in. They have a battery monitoring level indicator, and they can be run in a large bank in a standardized rack unit, 19-inch rack unit. All of these check huge boxes that if I had the budget for, I would be getting these batteries for expansion rather than something super cheap that I've got to worry about all the different cables and all the different breakers and fuses and fuse boxes and bus bars. I would just get these rack units and then wire them up. It would be so much simpler. So the simplest of these builds would be one of those EG4 rack unit batteries, a Grow Watt inverter, your solar panels, and then the wires in between. And then if you're running parallel, you would need some fuses in there. And then I would also highly, highly, highly encourage you to have a DC disconnect switch that is capable of handling the current and voltage of your DC circuits. One on the PV side, and then possibly an additional one going into your inverter. After that, I got to digging, and Santan actually has on their website some recommended charge controllers, and pull that up here. Those are the EP01s, and it looks like a 100 amp EP-Ever MPPT solar charge controller is $400. An 80 amp one is $380. I don't recommend going much lower than that, because often when you get much lower than 80 amps, they no longer support 150 volts. When you go below 150 volts, then 120 volts worth of solar, for your easy math, if you pretended that you were getting 30 volts off of your panels and you had 4 panels, that would be 120 volts. On colder days with clear skies, the panels actually perform better than their laboratory tests. The lab tests with the numbers on the sticker are rated at 70 degrees. So then you can run into overvoltage faults and have your charger shut down until that drops. So it could be a perfectly sunny day and you're not charging your batteries. So that's why I recommend trying to shoot for that higher amperage, higher voltage, 150 volts if you can find it, if you're going with discrete charge controller and a discrete inverter. So right there on Santan Solar's site, they've got some EP-Ever charge controllers. They also have Victron ones, but from what I've seen, people have been really happy with these EP-Evers. Either go with an EP-Ever charge controller and your own inverter and go through all the rigmarole and wiring of putting all those together, or just save up a little bit extra, just a little bit extra, not much, and go with GrowWatt. Those were probably the 2 systems that I would recommend at the moment. I really discourage going to complete discrete component systems if you can at all costs avoid it, because if you do not know what you're doing, you can seriously hurt somebody or set something on fire. Contact a qualified professional to help you through that, if that's what the direction you're going. It would be very difficult for me to assist you with that. That's why companies like Light Harvest Solar would be more than happy to walk you through building your system. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. I'm looking at these EP-Evers, but really I've got my eye set on these GrowWatt inverter chargers. And then from there, the EG4 batteries, the rack units with the DC breaker and pre-charge resistors already built in, takes a lot of the thought out of it, ready to go. That's the direction I would go. If for some reason I keep not able to hit the budget target for that, my next battery of choice would be a Wise battery, but Will Prowse put out a video on these Wise batteries a couple weeks ago. At the time of filming, they were $350 a piece. By the next day, they had rose in price by $50 a piece to $400 or $399, and then later that week completely sold out on Amazon. So the EG4s, they're coming in by the boatload. People are tracking their shipments around the world. You should be able to get your hands on them. The GrowWatts are from Signature Solar out of Texas. Santan Solar is out of Arizona, and they also have a new location. So that's what I would recommend for these larger builds. For the smaller builds, I still recommend the Bluetti from Max Oak. They have some newer models out that can support higher capacities. They can be used as whole home backups, things like that. But please help your consultants or your buddies out and tell them the make and model of the parts that you already have so that they can fill in the gaps from there. Otherwise, it's just a big mystery. With that, I'll see you next time.